Hey everyone, my name is Olav, and in this tutorial series you will learn how to make a complete chess set in Blender. We're also going to make the horse at the end of the tutorial series, but the modeling of that one is obviously going to be a bit more complex. As always, it's going to be quick and easy, so let's get started. And if you want to support the channel on Patreon, you can also get benefits like tutorial files, voting power, and free paid assets. So check that out in the link in the description. Okay, so let's start off by making the chessboard. So press S, then set to scale the cube on the Z-axis. And then press S, then Shift set to scale the object only on the X and Y-axis. And then let's select the light and turn it into a sun. And then let's set the strength to 3 so that we have some basic lighting for the chessboard. And then let's open a new window so that we can use some nodes. So go into the shader editor. And then we're going to replace the principal nodes. Press X to delete. And then search by pressing Shift A. And let's add a glossy node. And then we need to add another node, so press Shift A, and let's add the checker texture, which we will use to create the chessboard texture. And then we can adjust the scale so that we get 8 times 8 squares. So let's add another one. Okay, so now it's 8 times 8, which is what we need for a chessboard. And then let's make the other color black. Let's make this one completely white. And then you can adjust the roughness later, but I'm going to set it to 1. Let's go into rendered view. And then back to solid view. Okay, and then next we need to remove the checker texture from the rest of the object. So let's call this one checker. And then let's add another material. And this one is just going to be black. So let's add a glossy shader and make it black. And then we need to assign the material to the other faces. So you can just press A to select everything and then hold in Shift and deselect the top face and then assign the material to the other faces as well. Okay, so now we have a very basic chessboard. So let's save before we continue. So I'm going to create a new folder, call it chess, and then select the folder and save the file. And then we're going to download a reference image. You'll find it in the link in the description, which we'll use to model the different pieces. So I'm just going to call this one ref, then go back to Blender. And then let's remove the shader editor, and then press Shift A, and then go to image, and then let's add a reference image, and then use the image that you just downloaded. And then press N. Let's set the rotation to 0 for all axes. And then let's set the X rotation to 90 degrees. And then press numpad 1 for front view. And then numpad 5 for orthographic view. And then press G, then set to grab the reference image on the Z-axis so that it's above the board. And then we're going to start off with the pawn. So let's take a close look, and then we need to move the 3D cursor. So let's set it to the middle of the bottom of the pawn. And then we need to go into Edit, Preferences, and then you need to add the Extra Objects add-on under Add Mesh. And then we can press Shift A. And then go to Mesh, Single Vert, and add Single Vert. Then we can go into Vertices selection, and then press E, then X to extrude on the X-axis. And then I'm just going to adjust the position of the vertices slightly on the z-axis. So press A, then G, then Z to grab them on the z-axis. And I recommend using the wireframe view for these extrusions. And then press E to extrude. And then E, then Z to extrude on the z-axis. And then E to extrude once again. And I'm speeding up this part because you just need to follow the shape of the piece. As you can see, E to extrude, E to extrude, and E then X to extrude, E then Z. And then make sure it goes to the middle of the piece. And then let's save before we continue. I'm just going to call this one pawn. Okay. And then let's hide the reference image and the board for now. And then we can add a screw modifier. And then go into edit mode by pressing tab. And we're going to adjust the vertex so that it ends up at the middle. So set the X location to 0. And then apply the screw modifier. And then tab for object mode. And let's add a subdivision surface modifier to increase the number of polygons to make the surface much smoother. And we can fix these holes later by adding some flat shading to the object. Okay, so let's edge select and hold in Alt to select a whole circle of edges, and let's make the bottom flat. And we can also select this one and just play around with the mean increase values and see what values you prefer for the shape. Okay, so I think something like this looks fine. And we can also adjust the mean increase value of this one. So just find out what mean increase values you prefer. And once the bottom of the pawn looks okay, we can continue. So let's click File, Save As, click on the plus sign, and then Save. And then next we need to add a sphere. So let's add the reference image, Shift A, and let's add an icosphere. Then press G, then Z, grab it on the Z-axis, and then S to scale. And then we need to add a subdivision surface modifier to increase the number of polygons. And then we can also add some smooth shading. Okay. So now we have the pawn. And then if you want to, you can adjust the scale and position of the sphere. Okay, so the next step in the tutorial will be to create a rook. So let's save before we continue. And then let's enable the overlay once again. And take a close look at the rook in the reference image. And then let's move the 3D cursor to the bottom middle of the rook reference image. And then let's add a single vertex. And then we need to go to vertex selection, and then press E and then X to extrude on the X-axis. And then press E, then Z to extrude on the Z-axis, then E, then X. And I'm going to speed up this part once again because it's just extrusion. So press E to extrude, and follow the reference image. Okay. And then at the end, press E then X and set it in the middle. And then let's save before we continue. So call it Rook. And then we need to add the screw modifier. And then let's hide the empty for now. Go into solid view. And then let's set the vertex location to 0 on the x-axis so that the hole is closed, and then apply the screw modifier. Then let's add a subdivision surface modifier and set the shading to flat. And we're going to do the same for the pawn as well. And then let's increase the number of subdivisions. And then we need to go into edit mode, and then edge selection, and hold in Alt and Shift. And let's set the increase values on the bottom to 1. And once again, you can adjust the increase values as you wish. So I think something like this looks fine. And then press Ctrl R and add a loop cut to the top, and then press S to scale up the loop cut. So something like this to create the tower of the rook, and then hold in Alt to select the whole circle, and then press E, then Z to extrude on the Z-axis. And then next you can press G, then Z to grab the extrusion on the Z-axis. And then we need to extrude some of the individual faces. So these ones are going to stay low. So let's select the other ones. So 3 at a time with 1 in the middle, and then press E and then Z to extrude on the Z-axis. And then let's display the reference image. Press G, then Z to grab it on the Z-axis. And then let's save before we continue. And next we're going to adjust the increase values for the rook so that it looks a bit better. So let's hide the reference image, and then hold in Alt and Shift, and select these edges. We can increase the increase value, set it to 0.5 for example. And then let's select these edges. So hold in Shift to select multiple edges. And then I'm going to set the increase value to around 0.5. And then let's select all of these edges as well. And for these we're going to give them a increase value at around 0.31. And then I'm going to decrease the increase values of these slightly, so to around 0.21. And I'm also going to increase the increase values of these edges, so to around 0.37. And I'm also going to select the top faces, holding Shift to select multiple faces. And then press G, then Z to grab them on the Z-axis. And that's it for part 1 of this tutorial series. And in part 2, we're going to make the king and the bishop. So let's save before we continue, and I'll see you at part 2. And thanks to my Patreon supporters, Mr. Monkey Shoes and Terry Davis.